There was no cry, no scream. Just the wind hissing through brittle mesquite and a pair of reins tied around raw wrists, dragging a girl through the dust like a forgotten thing. They found her that way. Or rather, they saw her. No one moved, half covered by blown sand. She lay face down beside the main road into town, where stagecoaches passed but never stopped. Her ankles were cut to the bone, her long black hair matted, tangled, spread behind her like a dying shadow. The reins, twisted and frayed, looped around her arms so tight they had fused with the swelling flesh. Whoever had done it never meant to kill her outright. They wanted her to walk barefoot until she dropped, and she had. A tumbleweed skittered past, somewhere. A saloon door creaked. The girl didn't stir. She couldn't have been more than 16. Apache, they whispered. Wild stock. She wore no shoes, no coat, just a buckskin dress that had been torn at the shoulder and smeared red down the side. Her cheek had dried blood on it, cracked and caked like sun-baked earth. But what truly unsettled them wasn't the damage, it was the absence of panic. She didn't cry. She didn't look for help. She was still alive, but her eyes, when they opened for a split second, didn't ask anything of the people watching. It was like she'd already buried herself. A horse snorted. Someone muttered to cover the silence. No one stepped forward. The sheriff scratched his neck, said something about not our kind. The preacher didn't speak. A woman from the boarding house shook her head once, sharply, as if trying to forget what she saw. And then, they all turned away, except the boy on the rooftop, just 10, legs dangling, licking sugar off his fingers as he watched with a wide, frozen stare. He would remember the shape of those reins for the rest of his life. Leather, tight, red at the ends. The girl's breathing grew shallower. Her fingers twitched, but not to move, just to feel the reins. The sky above began to darken, not from dusk, but from a storm gathering in the north. Purple clouds swelled like bruises behind the ridgeline, and the dust started to rise again, gritty and brown, lifting her hair like seaweed underwater. Still, no one helped her, because helping meant touching her, and touching meant crossing something invisible and deadly, something old. She wasn't a person to them. She was a question, a curse, a ghost with blood still wet. That's when he came riding in, just a silhouette at first. A lone rider atop a chestnut mare, moving slow but deliberate, as if he knew exactly what he was about to see. Long duster flapping behind him. No badge, no companion, just a broken hat brim and a rifle strapped behind the saddle. He didn't ask questions, didn't speak. He dismounted, boots sinking into the soft edge of the road, and for a moment, the whole town froze again, because they knew him. He was the rancher who lived on Dead Horse Ridge, the one who didn't go to church, who drank alone and spoke to no one unless spoken to. Some said he'd buried a wife and child on his land years back. Others said he'd gone half feral himself, but all agreed on one thing: he didn't bother with strangers. Until now. The reins made a soft click as he bent down, not loud, just enough to be heard over the hush of judgment rolling from the bystanders' stares. With calloused fingers, he slid a knife from his boot and pressed it gently to the knot at her wrist. The girl flinched, and for the first time, something changed. Her fingers opened not to fight, but to release, like a bird unclenching after a long death grip on wire. The reins dropped to the dust. He lifted them, held them in one hand, and stared at them for a long while. Something in his eyes darkened. Recognition, memory. It didn't matter. What mattered was the silence, heavy, final. Then, without a word, he picked her up. She didn't weigh much, just bones, blood, and silence, as he carried her past the townsfolk. No one spoke, not even the sheriff. The man didn't ask permission, didn't wait for approval. He walked to his horse, tied the reins to the saddle horn, not her wrists, and placed her gently across the front. She didn't resist. She didn't look back. He mounted behind her and rode out into the storm, and the reins, they swayed in the wind untied, red-tipped, trailing like a forgotten question. They would become the symbol of everything buried in this land power. Pain, ownership, and maybe something more. But not yet. Not until the man who never looked back became the only one who did. No one knew his full name anymore. He hadn't spoken it in years. Maybe he'd forgotten it himself. The town called him Holt, short for whatever came before. The man from Dead Horse Ridge. The widower. The recluse. He'd buried his family in a fenced patch of land where the juniper trees leaned too far east. And after that, he just stopped being a man to them. He became rumor. Some said he used to be a Union scout who lost half a platoon in the desert. Others said his wife had Apache blood. And that was why the townsfolk never trusted him again. But Holt never confirmed anything. He simply rode into town for supplies, paid in coin, and rode back out. He didn't look people in the eye, he didn't tip his hat. But on that storm-hung afternoon, when he picked up that girl with reins carved into her skin, Holt did something no one had seen him do in 10 years. He turned his horse not toward home, but toward the doctor's house. The doctor refused. Said the girl was feral. Said she might bring trouble. Said he wasn't equipped for that kind of healing. So Holt didn't argue, didn't threaten. He just turned his horse again westward, away from town, away from their judgment, and rode into the high scrublands, where the wind whistled through canyons like a whispering choir. The girl stirred only once. She didn't speak, but her fingers twitched against his chest again. The same slow brush as before, as if trying to remember the shape of something once known: kindness, maybe, or safety, or her own name. Holt didn't speak either. He just watched the horizon, jaw locked, eyes narrowed against the rising grit. The reins he'd taken from her wrists now hung neatly coiled by the saddle horn, untouched. He'd untied them but hadn't thrown them away. They mattered. Somehow. By dusk, they reached his ranch, a house weathered gray by wind and time, with sagging eaves and a front porch that groaned under every bootstep. The windmill creaked like a spine out of joint. Chickens scattered at the sound of the mare's hooves. And the grave markers, too, side by side, caught the last sliver of orange light like rusted coins on a poker table. He carried the girl inside. The main room was sparse. A table, a fire grate, a chair with one arm cracked, a rifle leaning against the corner, dust on everything. But the bed, his bed was made. He set her there, pulled a quilt over her legs, then stepped back and stood for a long time, staring at the blood on her feet, the dirt in her fingernails, the raw skin where the reins had rubbed her flesh into a weeping burn. Still, she didn't speak, so he did something stranger than talking. He took off his coat, hung it on the wall, and lit the oil lamp. The flame hissed up like a struck match, throwing a warm glow that made her face look young, too young. Then slowly, he sat on the floor beside the bed, not in exhaustion, but as a sentry. The wind rattled the window panes. Coyotes howled in the distance. The storm hadn't broken yet, but it would. Holt knew that kind of pressure. The silence before a fracture. The girl's breath came in shallow, even waves, but her eyes stayed open now, staring at the low ceiling beams, as if counting them or trying to believe in them. The reins still hung from his saddle, outside in the dark. Wind tugged at them, making them knock lightly against the leather like bones in a wind chime. That sound, that quiet clacking, would become a kind of music in the days to come. A haunted lullaby. But that first night, Holt said nothing. He just watched over her, the way you watch a newborn foal after its first collapse, willing it to stand, but knowing it might not. She didn't weep. He didn't touch her. And somewhere between that silence and the lamp's dying flicker, something passed between them. Not trust, not yet, but a pause, a breath, a single sacred moment untouched by pain. The next morning, he went out to fetch water from the well. When he came back, she was still there, awake, silent, staring at his coat on the wall. Her fingers had wrapped around a scrap of the quilt like a tether. She hadn't run, not because she couldn't, but because something inside her, small, fragile, had chosen to stay. And in that choice was the first sliver of hope. The steam filled the small room like morning mist rolling over cold earth. Holt poured water from the kettle into a battered metal basin. The water shimmered gold in the lamplight. It wasn't hot, just warm enough to coax numb skin back to life. He tested it with a finger, then set it gently on the edge of the table, close to the bed. The girl didn't move. She sat upright now, knees pulled close to her chest under the quilt. Her hair, still matted and tangled, fell over her face like a curtain drawn halfway open. Just enough for him to glimpse one eye, sharp, amber-colored, watching everything. Not frightened, not comforted, just watching. Holt crouched down again, this time with the basin and a square of clean cloth. He didn't speak. He knew words were brittle things. Broken ones cut deeper than silence ever could. So he worked in silence. First, he touched the edge of the quilt. She didn't pull back. Then her ankle swollen, caked with dried blood, and marked by the crude friction of too many miles on desert stone. Her skin had split where the weight of the rains had dragged her down. He dipped the cloth in warm water and pressed it gently to the wound. Her whole body stiffened just once, then loosened again. The cloth turned rust red. He rinsed it, pressed again, dabbed at the other ankle, the soles of her feet, the curve of her wrist where the leather had bitten deepest. Always slow, always silent. He cleaned her the way a man cleans something he doesn't fully understand but knows is sacred. The fire crackled in the stove. Outside, the wind had settled into a low, constant moan across the land like the voice of the prairie itself, never quite sleeping. Every so often, the girl would glance at the window, then back to him. Her mouth stayed shut, but her eyes weren't empty anymore. They held something cautious, something bruised but breathing. Holt didn't try to name it. He just cleaned her wounds. When he reached for her hands, she flinched not from pain but memory. Her fingers twitched like a spider in its final spasms. She looked down at her wrists, at the raw, darkened lines left behind. For a long second, she seemed to fall into those scars. So Holt did something unexpected. He dipped the cloth again, then placed it in her hand. She looked at it, unmoving. He waited. After a long, long pause, she reached up and touched her own shoulder, the place where her dress had torn. The cloth made a slow arc across her skin. Not graceful, but deliberate. A child cleaning herself for the first time. She didn't look at him, but she kept the cloth. That was enough. By nightfall, the basin water was dark with grit and blood. Her skin, though still split and bruised, looked less like war and more like survival. He brought bread and stew, left it on the table, sat across the room in the chair with the cracked arm. She didn't eat, not at first. But when she did, it was with her fingers, slow and steady, like someone rebuilding trust with every bite. And all the while, the rains outside the window tapped softly in the wind. Click, click, pause, like a heartbeat just learning how to beat again. The next morning, he found her sitting on the porch, legs tucked under her, watching the sunrise. She held the reins in her lap, not like a prisoner clutching her chains, but like someone holding a map she didn't yet know how to read. She didn't look up when he stepped outside, just said barely audible, "Why'd you keep 'em?" Her first words, ragged, dry, but clear. Holt paused, then sat beside her, hands resting on his knees. "I didn't know what you'd want," he said. She nodded once. Not a thank you, not forgiveness, just recognition. Then carefully, she reached into her own tangled hair and pulled out a single feather, black sharp, with a silver tip, and slid it through one of the Reins loops. She didn't explain, and he didn't ask. There were words that never reached the mouth. Some were too broken, others too sacred, and some like hers were knotted so deep inside the body they came out sideways in flinches, in glances, in the way she cleaned her plate but never touched the bread. The days passed quiet. Holt didn't press her. He offered her space, food, tasks, never questions. She swept the porch with the back of a branch, refilled the chicken trough, sat by the well and traced shapes in the dust with a stick. And always, the reins stayed close, not tied to her, not clenched in her fists, just nearby, hanging from the porch rail, draped across her lap, wrapped gently around her wrist while she napped in the sun. It wasn't ownership anymore. It was remembrance, like a language spoken in symbols rather than sound. On the 5th morning, she woke screaming. It was the only time he ever saw her wild. Not like an animal, but like someone trying to claw her way out of a fire no one else could see. Her limbs thrashed. Her breath came ragged, frantic. She tumbled off the bed, hit the floor hard. Holt rushed in barefoot, heart hammering. She didn't see him. Her eyes were somewhere far away, some desert place where blood soaked into red rock and never left. He dropped to his knees beside her. "Hey," he whispered. "You're not there." But she was. Her hands flew up, fending off some invisible attacker. She gasped a raw, wordless cry. Her fingernails scratched her own shoulder, tearing open a scab he'd cleaned just days ago. That's when he reached for her. Not to hold her down, but to give her something real. He took her hand, slowly, and pressed it to his own chest, on right over his heart. "Here," he said. "Feel this." She fought him weakly, then froze. His heart thumped under her palm, steady, solid, unafraid. And in that touch, something cracked. Her breath hitched. Her eyes found his wild, glassy, rimmed with tears she didn't know how to shed. Then she collapsed into him. No words, just weight, heat, trembling. He held her there, rocking slow, like he used to rock his daughter before her fever dreams stole her away. The way you rock someone who doesn't believe the nightmare's over until they can feel a body beside theirs. That night, she spoke again. Not clearly, not in full, but enough. Her voice came like wind through broken chimes, fragmented, metallic, soft, dragged. She said, 2 days. Holt didn't answer. She stared into the fire, blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Had to bite the rope, she whispered. Or I'd choke when I fell. He closed his eyes. She turned to him. "You ever bite to live?" He nodded. "Once. In the war. Me too," she said. And that was all. She never told him who tied the reins, never named a face. But one night, she sat by the window while the storm winds howled, and she said they passed me between camps, like water in a cracked bowl, never enough to hold. Just spilled, spilled, spilled. Then she turned. I ran. Silence. I bit one. Deep. She looked at her hands then, still raw around the knuckles. "I think I killed him." Holt didn't blink, didn't recoil, just said, "Good." She blinked once, surprised. "You'd have done the same?" she asked. "No," he said. "I wouldn't have waited that long." The next day, she placed the feather, her silver-tipped talisman, into a crack in the windowsill, as if it belonged there now. Like a piece of her she could finally set down without fear. She spoke more often after that, never much, never light, but with purpose. She asked about the chickens, the water pump, the windmill that squealed in the night. Then one day she asked about the graves. He didn't lie. "My wife, my daughter," he said simply. The girl was quiet for a long while, then said, "You buried them, right?" It wasn't a question. "No one buried my sister," she added. Just that. Just enough. She never mentioned the Reins again. But one morning, Holt woke to find them missing from the porch rail. He panicked, briefly, then saw her out in the corral, teaching a colt to walk with one loop around its neck. Gentle, slow, loose. The reins, once her prison, were now the tool she used to teach the foal freedom. That's when Holt understood. She hadn't just survived, she was transforming. The change didn't come with a kiss. It came with a bowl. One evening, while the sky burned copper and the cicadas started their low drone in the trees, she brought out 2 bowls of stew, one for him, one for herself, without asking. She sat beside him on the porch, legs tucked under, elbows brushing. Holt didn't speak, but he didn't move away either. The fire between them wasn't fast or loud. It smoldered low, like coals banked in the ashes of something older. Not attraction, not yet. Something more elemental. The recognition of another breathing soul. Still alive, still here. She ate quickly, eyes flicking to his every few seconds. He ate slower, savoring the warmth, the quiet company. And in that silence, the prairie seemed to lean in closer. The wind stilled. The air thickened with possibility. Later that night, she sat by the hearth rubbing salve into her feet. Her toes had healed, but the skin was still pink and soft, like something reborn. He handed her a rag without being asked. She took it, nodding once. He stood by the door, one hand resting on the frame. She looked up. "Do I still look wild to you?" she asked. Her voice held no bite, just curiosity. He met her gaze, slow and measured. "No," he said. "You look awake." She blinked, once, then smiled, not wide, not sweet, just a twitch at the corner of her mouth, like something remembered from before pain. It was the first time he'd seen that from her. And it hit harder than any kiss. That night, she didn't close her door all the way. It stayed cracked. A narrow slice of firelight from the hearth crossed the floor like an invitation. He didn't cross it, but he saw it. And that was enough. The days blurred. They worked side by side. She mended an old saddlebag. He repaired the broken hinge on the chicken coop. She sang softly, in a language he didn't know. At first, just under her breath, then louder. He didn't ask for a translation. Some things are meant to be mysterious. She braided her hair now, kept it clean, tucked feathers in when she felt like it. Not just the silver-tipped one, but new ones, blue jay, meadowlark, even one from a crow, each with its own meaning. Her own code. One morning, he found a braid tied to the reins. They still hung by the porch, never used, never touched. But now they bore her mark, a signature, a story told through thread and feather and silence. They sat together more often. Sometimes she told stories half real, half dream, of desert ghosts and fire-breathing horses, of sisters who turned into hawks to escape men with black teeth. Holt listened. Sometimes he told stories too. Not about the war, or the graves, but about trees, about rain, about how his wife used to collect wildflowers and press them in books. She asked one evening, "What did you love most about her?" He stared at the horizon for a long time before answering. "She never asked for more than I could give," he said. The girl nodded slowly, eyes soft. "That's rare." Then more quietly, "That's what I want too." They didn't speak of love, not directly. But when she brushed a strand of hair from his face with the back of her hand, and he leaned into it without flinching, that was enough. When he left half his coffee for her in the mornings, and she drank it cold, grinning crooked without needing to say why that was enough. One evening, as dusk fell, she touched his hand. Not with urgency, just presence. "I'd ride with you," she said, "if you asked." He didn't answer right away, but he didn't pull his hand away either. Instead, he looked to the porch rail where the reins still hung, and said, "Not with Reins, not ever again." She smiled then, real, open, and leaned her head against his shoulder. They sat that way until the stars blinked on above them. No promises, no declarations, just warmth, just knowing. They came without warning, 3 riders cloaked in grit and silence, faces wrapped in bandanas, rifles slung low and loose. The kind of men who rode with cruelty tucked in their boots. Not for justice or bounty, but habit. The girl saw them first. She froze, one hand gripping the saddle horn, the other instinctively brushing her wrist where the reins had once dug deep. A shadow passed through her eyes, recognition, memory, dread. Holt stepped forward, rifle in hand. She dismounted. "Inside," he said. But she didn't move. "They know me," she whispered. "Or think they do." The riders slowed to a stop near the gate, the lead man flicking a match across his boot and lighting a thin roll of tobacco. Smoke curled lazily from the side of his mouth. Didn't expect to find her here, he said. His voice was low, familiar in a way that made Holt's jaw tighten. She's got something belongs to us. The girl didn't flinch. Say the word, Holt muttered. But she shook her head. I'm not prey anymore. And before he could stop her, she stepped forward. One of the men laughed. Look who grew teeth. But his hand twitched toward his holster, and that was all Holt needed. He fired. The shot cracked the silence like lightning through bone. The lead man's shoulder snapped back, and he tumbled from the saddle with a guttural grunt. The others went for their rifles, but they were slow. The girl didn't wait. She ran low, fast, not away but toward the mare. In one smooth motion, she swung onto the saddle and kicked hard. The horse lunged forward, a blur of hooves and dust. She charged the second rider before he could aim. As he raised his rifle, she swung a loop of rain, the same one she'd once feared, and cracked it across his face. He screamed. The third rider bolted, coward. Always was. But the girl wheeled the mare hard and gave chase. Her hair streamed behind her like black fire, and the reins, those cursed, beautiful reins, flew beside her, uncoiled, free, no longer binding her, but guiding her. She didn't catch him. Didn't need to. She turned back after a quarter-mile, face fierce, eyes blazing. Eyes. When she rode into the yard again, Holt was helping the wounded man to his feet, rifle pressed to his rib. The girl dismounted and walked straight up to him. Who tied me? She asked. The man's lip bled. He didn't answer. She leaned in. I remember your boots. With the nail missing. Silence. Then she pulled the feather from her hair, the silver-tipped one, and shoved it into his hand. You give that to the next girl you try to break, and tell her I said she doesn't belong to anyone. Then she turned away. Holt met her at the porch. Eyes searching. She wiped her face once, roughly. Not a tear. Just grit. I didn't kill him, she said. You could have. She looked up. I didn't want to. That was when he knew. She wasn't wild anymore. She was choosing. Every moment, every breath. And in that choice was strength. Later, as the wounded man rode off, cradling his shoulder and the feather like a curse, Holt watched the girl hang the reins back on the porch rail. But this time she tied them into a knot. Not tight, not cruel, just finished. A circle closed, a chapter sealed. Then she turned to him and said, Let's go inside. He followed. That night, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their hands found each other in the firelight, fingers intertwined not like shackles but like branches braided by the wind. Outside, the reins swung gently in the breeze, silent, empty, as they were always meant to be. They left the ranch in silence, no fanfare, no goodbye, just a saddlebag packed with dried meat, canteens, and a folded quilt, the same one she'd clung to her first night on his bed. Now it was hers. Worn, soft, stitched at the corners with faded thread. Holt didn't ask where they were going. He simply rode beside her. The mare took the lead for a while, hooves kicking up morning dust as they passed the graves beneath the leaning juniper trees. The girl glanced just once at the two worn markers, then touched the braid in her hair, where a new feather had been added. A white one. Dove. Maybe. It caught the breeze like a whisper of peace, down the trail. The land opened wide, golden prairie stretching flat into horizon. The kind of place where stories could begin again without ghosts watching. She rode easy now, not like someone running, not like someone being led, but like someone who finally understood what it meant to move forward without being pulled. They didn't speak much those first hours, just let the sound of hooves and wind fill the silence. Then, softly, she said, I was never wild. He looked at her. She didn't turn. They just didn't know what to do with something free. The words landed heavy. He nodded. Later, when they stopped to rest, she unpacked the box, the small one where she'd folded the reins. She placed it down gently beneath a sycamore tree, opened it one last time, and removed the loop of leather. No blood, no dirt. Just smooth, dark strand, then knuckle with fingers slow and steady. She untied the knot, not to use them, but to let them breathe. She draped the reins across the tree's low branch. They hung there like a story retold, this time without fear. "I don't need to burn them," she said. "They're not mine anymore." And she was right. The reins had belonged to pain, to captivity, to silence. Now they were something else. A memory reclaimed. As they rode on, the land shifted from grass to red stone. Crickets sang in the low hollows. A hawk circled above. She rode ahead, now and then testing her horse's speed, letting the wind pull her braid back like a banner. At one point, Holt caught up and reached out. Not to pull her back, just to ride shoulder to shoulder, and they crested a ridge at sunset. Below, a creek shimmered like silver spilled from the sun's last breath. She slowed, looked at him. "What happens now?" she asked. He smiled, not wide, but real. "We live," he said. She considered that, then nodded. "I'd like that." And in that quiet agreement, the world shifted, not loudly, but entirely. They set camp by the creek, shared bread and silence. The stars above blinked slow and steady like the sky breathing. She lay back against her saddle, arms folded under her head. The feather in her braid gleamed under moonlight. Holt watched her for a while, watched the ease in her chest, the absence of flinching, the stillness of someone who no longer expected pain to strike from nowhere. And then he lay down too, not beside her, with her. As the wind stirred the grass, the reins swung gently back on that sycamore branch, miles behind them, untied, unclaimed, and free, just like her. Sometimes the things that once controlled us never fully vanish. They hang in our minds like old reins, quiet, familiar, and dangerously easy to grab again. But healing isn't always about cutting those ties. Sometimes it's about choosing not to use them. This story reminds us that freedom isn't just escape. It's the power to move forward without needing to be pulled. We all carry symbols of our suffering, scars, habits, fears. But when we repurpose them into strength, when we choose not to burn them but to transform them, we begin to write a new story. One where the past doesn't vanish but it no longer leads. And in that quiet shift, life starts again, not with thunder, but with a ride beside someone who sees us, not as wild, but as awake.